Hi, I'm Larry Hama, and you're listening to Talking Joe.
Making it up as you go along takes everything you've got. Take a look at all those comics, he sure has wrote a lot. Larry Hama is his name. It's time for Talking Joe, where everybody knows his name. And they're all so glad he came. You wanna be where you can hear interviews of great acclaim. You wanna be in the Eisner Hall of Fame. You wanna be where you can hear interviews of great acclaim. You wanna be in the Eisner Hall of Fame.
Hey, it's not him, Mark, it's me, Tim, with a special episode of Talking Joe recorded 9 November 2024 in Des Moines, Iowa at Assembly Required. This is the Living Legends Larry Hama and Ron Wagner panel, which I moderated. Special thanks to Mark, who planted a seed when he kind of suggested I ask Brian Sauer, convention organizer, to moderate a panel. And special thanks to Brian Sauer for asking me to moderate this panel. We pick up at High V Hall in Des Moines in the panel room.
Probably need to eat the mics.
No.
Yes.
Oh, I love the reverb. Yes. What do we do? Karaoke.
If you can't hear us at any point during the panel, please just raise your hand and say, drop the mic, Ron, and say, louder, please. Check one, check two, check one, check two. Check one, check two. Larry, can we get a mic check?
Now is the winter of our discontent.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether he's noble in the mind, so to say. Sorry.
Stop. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first panel of Assembly Required 2024. Thank you for being here. My name is Tim Finn. I own a brick and mortar comic book store in Massachusetts, Hub Comics. I'm writing a history book on G.I. Joe. Find me at arealamericanbook.com. And I'm half of the Talking Joe podcast. Oh, thanks. Which is every week. New episodes arrive on Thursdays, and Mark, the other half, sends his regards. On my right are two people who need no introduction. So, Larry Hama and Ron Wagner. So the name of this panel is Living Legends. So, Ron, let's break the ice. How does it feel to be a living legend?
I don't feel that at all. He's a living legend. I just worked with him. So there we go. So,
Larry, how does it feel to be a living legend? And also, I'm sorry.
It's better than being a dead one.
you win.
Okay, the two of you have collaborated many times on G.I. Joe, on Nth Man, again on G.I. Joe, and more recently on something mysterious, and that's not G.I. Joe. And I wanted to ask some broader questions, or maybe some non-G.I. Joe art and process questions. I'm struck that both of you had very important mentorships when you were starting out in illustration and comics. And those two mentors, as illustration and comics professionals, had some things in common. So, Ron, can you tell us about this comics professional who was your mentor when you got out of school?
I got out of the Kubert School, and I moved next door. Actually, he would live behind me in a carriage house, and his name was Gray Morrow. And he was a fantastic comic book artist and illustrator, and he was very kind to me because I was trying to get work, and so I would go into Marvel in DC and show my portfolio, and people would be, come back in 2 weeks. And then I would go home, and Gray would say, don't worry, kid, here, have a drink, and let's and he was drawing Tarzan for some newspapers at the time, and he's like, here, draw the backgrounds for me, and you don't draw any necks on people. What's wrong with that? And, and then so he was a great guy for me to kind of give me any work, Ray. So he was a great guy, and now I draw necks. So yeah.
All right, so Gray Morrow drew the Tarzan Sunday strip from '83 to 2001, but he'd also drawn and painted book and magazine covers and drawn color comics and black and white comics for all of the publishers.
Yes.
How often did you see him? Was this like there was a second desk and you were an assistant?
No,
was this a friend you visited?
No, well, again, like he lived right behind me. Like I walked to his house, and then so I could just stumble back to my house and then work there. So, because afternoons were fun with Gray. There was he had a shooting range in his basement.
Well, he had a bullet trap.
A bullet trap,
Yeah.
Which is an angled piece of metal.
It's a steel box with an angle
Mike, please.
in it. With a steel box with an angled steel plate, and the bottom is filled with sand.
Yeah.
So you can shoot in your basement and not have it, bounce around the walls.
So there was, scotch drinking and shooting large guns with Gray, and I thought, hey, this comic book gig is going to be fun. So, yeah.
Well, he had 2 filing cabinets full of pistols.
He did, absolutely, yeah. So, yeah. So take your
he
pick.
had some pistols I'd only ever seen in gun magazines.
Because Larry knew him as well. He was good friends with him. So, yeah.
Larry, did you also go to Gray Morrow's house and shoot?
Oh yeah,
in the basement?
I used to drive out there with my buddy Ed Davis, who had been did 2 tours in Nam as a LRP, Long Range Recon Patrol, and he was the guy that I pretty much based Stalker on, and I also used him as the model for Wraith in Wolverine, and they had Will.i.am play him in the movie, and they actually made him look like Ed Davis. They gave him the cowboy hat and the shades, and the whole works. And Ed had been the president of one of the biggest black gangs in Brooklyn before he went into the service. So he was a badass. And we would drive out there and sit around and he had drawing tables, and we'd sit and draw for a couple of hours, and then we'd go down in the basement and shoot off a bunch of 9mm and 45, and we go back upstairs and draw, then we go back downstairs and shoot some more. Then we go out to the stable and ride around on Gray's horse Autumn.
Yep.
And then we'd go over to the Bobs.
The
Yeah,
Bobs.
remember them?
Yeah, of course I do.
Robert, Roberta, and Rob Jr.
Yes, the Bobs.
They had a pool.
They had a pool.
And they had a bumper pool table.
Yeah.
And an open bar.
And an open bar. There's a theme here, isn't there?
Okay, so I can place this. Larry, you are in Manhattan at the time, and Ron, you're in New Jersey?
New Jersey, yeah.
Okay, but you were taking the train into New York
Yes.
to see editors?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so Gray Morrow was also in New Jersey?
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Larry, your mentor was Wally Wood, who also had a long career drawing for all the publishers in black and white and in color, creating and co-creating some famous characters, and also...
Yeah, he did EC Comics and Mad Magazine, and worked for both DC and Marvel. He was one of the original Daredevil artists. And
yes, the red costume is very much Wally Wood.
Yeah.
So how did you meet him, and how long did you spend with him, and what were those sessions or weeks or months like?
Well, I got out of the Army in '71, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had a job before I went in the Army as drawing shoes for Sears, Roebuck, Montgomery Ward, and J.C. Penney catalogs. It's a lot of shoes. Those are big catalogs. And I had Andy Warhol's old desk at the studio. It was his...
At Wally Wood's.
No, at the
art
studio that did all the artwork and photography for all those catalogs.
Okay, and you were drawing shoes because why were they not photographing shoes? Why did they have someone draw the shoes?
Because the shoes sucked. I mean, if you see a drawing of a shoe, don't buy it. You know, if the shoes look good, you could photograph them. But if they were kind of wonky, you have to have somebody draw them and pretty them up.
Make them sexy.
I would draw them on glossy photo paper with a 9H pencil sharpened to a needle point, and you couldn't dent the paper. I had to put a pumice ground on the photo paper and leave this fine trail of graphite. And because the next person in the process was the airbrush artist who had to cut a frisket and spray on the color, and he passed it on to the detail guy who put in every stitch and all the braiding on the laces and all the shiny marks. So it was like 4 or 5 people involved in the process.
If I can just add a little bit of history here, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, photography couldn't reproduce in newspapers, so things were drawn, right? So a journalist might go to an event like a flower show or a political speech, and there would be an illustrator who would draw it, because that could be photographed and that could reproduce cleanly in black and white.
Right.
A photo would not reproduce.
So I didn't want to go back to drawing shoes, and I had gone to high school with Ralph Reese, who was another comic book artist, and he said, "Why don't you come over? Let's start a studio together." Because I could pencil faster than he could pencil, and he could ink faster than I could ink. So we thought, well, combine the two of us, we could actually maybe make some money instead of losing it. So I worked for him for a while, and there wasn't enough work coming in. We were doing black and white stuff for Children's Television Workshop and National Lampoon and Rolling Stone. We even did some stuff for Esquire. So Ralph set me up with Wally Wood. He had been Wally Wood's assistant when he was a teenager. So I went out to Brooklyn and started working for Woody on Cannon and Sally Forth, which were strips that were in the Overseas Weekly, which was a tabloid newspaper sold in PXs. We used to all call it the Oversexed Weekly, because it was more similar to the National Enquirer than anything else, but in a very military way. So there were 2 strips that we did. One was Sally Forth, which was a humor strip, and the other was Cannon, which was sort of a gritty film noir type of strip. And he taught me to letter, so I was lettering the strips, and I was looking up swipe and doing backgrounds.
Wait, help us out. What do you mean looking up swipe?
Well, reference.
Okay.
Woody had a morgue, which is what artists call your filing cabinets full of photo reference, which were all clipped from magazines. And
because if the script calls for a particular Cadillac or the Statue of Liberty or the Eiffel
Right.
Tower, you know how to draw it.
And in those days, all the auto companies had photo files that they sent to any artist who wanted them for free, because it was, they wanted you to draw their cars. And they were incredible files. They had people doing stuff with the cars that were really typical, like opening the doors and like going into the glove compartment, and it was great stuff. I had a file from every car company, and my other job was to traced them onto the paper with what Woody called the swipograph, which was an opaque projector. I think the brand name was Artograph.
Right, you
Yes.
put the photo here, and there's a light bulb, and it.
Yeah, and it
Projects
projects it.
onto the-
Yeah,
on the
actually,
wall.
it projects it down onto the paper.
Okay.
Yeah. And he taught me to letter using the Caspar Saladino alphabet.
Who was DC's premier letterer,
Yeah.
and who lettered all of DC's covers. And on books that he didn't letter, he would always letter the first page, because
Right.
that would have the title.
Yeah.
He was DC's best letterer.
And because Woody said, you know, if I can't teach you how to letter, I can't teach you anything else. Because, you know, lettering is your basic, you know, form. You know, you have to be able to do a straight line this way, a straight line this way, and a nice circle. You know, that's control of the tool, which is all there is to it. So when Woody, I did that for over a year, and then Woody had moved to Connecticut, and so he set me up with Neil Adams, who had a studio in Manhattan called Continuity.
Because you weren't going to commute.
I wasn't going to go to Connecticut.
You lived in
I lived
New York.
Midtown Manhattan. I had an illegal apartment that I was paying $50 a month for. It was like in a garret in a fancy apartment building, one room, you know. And Neil was charging $50 for desk space at Continuity. So my total overhead for like living space and workspace was $100 a month. But considering that my first comic book job at Marvel was Iron Fist, and my rate was $23 a page for finished pencils. And it was a big deal when I got a $2 raise up to $25. So, and I could barely do a page a day. I could have made actually better money flipping burgers at Mickey D's. And I remember I told my mom, "Hey Mom, I got a monthly comic at Marvel." And she said, "Oh, that's nice. When are you going to get a real job?" But that's the way it was.
Okay, so lettering, Ron.
Yes.
At the Kubert School,
Mm-hmm.
you learned how to letter.
Oh, yeah.
Because everyone learned how to letter.
Yeah, we had a lettering class.
Okay, so Kubert School, 3 years,
Yeah.
3-year program.
Yes.
What year is the lettering class?
First year.
Yeah.
Who taught it?
Hi, Eisman.
How amazing was this class? Or
Oh,
what?
we hated it.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So
So we're going to letter all day. And then we had to fill 11 by 17 pages front and back full of lettering. And then we had to practice word balloons and stuff. And it was just,
wait,
you
word
know,
balloons are easy because there's a template and you just
Yeah,
trace,
no.
right? You just
Oh,
trace it on the edge of the raised
no,
plastic.
no.
which
I do
you-
that now.
what you do.
No, you're freehand all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You're not using templates.
No.
Okay.
No, and it was T-square,
Okay.
and the little guide thing that runs, this little plastic guide, it's called
Ames Guide.
Ames Lettering Guide. And here's a bit of trivia, the Ames Lettering Guide was actually made in Ames, Iowa. It said it right on it, so there's a little Iowa.
So,
flag.
if you haven't seen it, remember in grade school the sort of half circle plastic protractor for angles? So it's a little like that. It slides along your T-square, and there's a disc in it that
A lot of
rotates.
little holes.
And as you rotate it, the holes can make spaces that are a little further or closer apart. So you put your pencil in and you drag it left and right. You put your pencil in, you drag it left and right. You lower your T-square, you put your pencil in, you drag it left and right, and you make lines. You make straight left and right lines that you are not going to ink because that's what you letter on. And then
But you could see traces of that on original art.
Yeah.
From that era.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they because the lines don't erase completely.
No.
Okay, so
No.
Ron.
Yes.
So you self-published a mini, sort of a sample comic a couple years ago
Uh-huh.
about this
Sid,
Sid,
my Elvis impersonating monster hunter.
Ron's Elvis impersonating monster hunter, and you lettered that.
Uh-huh. Old school.
Okay,
Yeah.
right on the boards.
Right on the boards. Yeah.
So what? So for the maybe Larry may have already answered this question with how Wally Wood phrased it, but what do you want people to know about lettering? Or what did lettering get you? Because you wanted to draw people and things.
Yeah, and when I did this little zine, it had been a long time since I lettered anything, so the lettering was possibly a little shaky. And nowadays, of course, it's all computer stuff. You can download a font and, who letters by hand anymore?
Although,
Well, that's the thing is that, old school, guys like Russ Heath always said that the lettering is part of the art.
It is.
It is. And him and Barry Windsor Smith and a bunch of other guys, they always Greeked in the lettering for the letterer and inked the balloons.
Yep.
And the caption boxes.
Right.
Because they didn't want the balloons or the caption boxes butting against the panel border. They wanted them to be floating so that there was color all the way around it. And a good example of that is Barry Smith's Weapon X. Every single balloon and every single caption floats in that. Because he meticulously, inked all the balloons.
Right.
Not the letters.
No. Russ would
rectangle.
do that too, and he would use the Ames guide to figure out
How much lettering
how
is going to go.
much lettering there had to be. So he did literally half the letterer's job.
Right.
But if you look at Barry Windsor Smith pages and Russ Heath pages, they look clean.
Yeah.
Because he said, when they butt these things up against the panel borders, it just looks ugly, because it's done by somebody who's not cognizant of the page as a whole piece of artwork.
Right.
And although lettering is done now digitally with the computer, good lettering done digitally is still done by someone who understands composition, flow, spacing, and design.
Right.
And it's subtle, but at my store we sometimes get samples in the mail, and sometimes I'll look at them, and subtly the lettering is terrible because the letterer knows how to type things and make ovals in a computer program, but doesn't understand placement, flow, and design.
And there's a certain charm to it that's, all of these kind of hand done and designed, and, it's just that computer stuff doesn't have.
Right.
So,
A lot of computer stuff looks just dead.
Right.
The thing about hand lettering is that, Woody would say, it's got to have zip. It's a very slight italic, and the horizontal lines are slightly uplifted.
I feel like when a character is getting excited or upset, if the script hasn't called for italics or bold, I feel like the letterer is often very subtly, slightly emphasizing those letters, getting them a little bigger, a little closer together, a little slanted to add to this feeling.
Right.
I feel like I heard Jim Shooter say, or someone was paraphrasing Jim Shooter, that in the 80s at Marvel there was this general rule that the top third of every panel should be devoid of anything important.
Right.
Because that's where the word balloons were going to go.
Right. Also, the first character to speak had to be on the left.
In my mind, that's still that way. Like the first character was on the left, it's talking first. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I would love to talk for another 2 hours about lettering. And
Because I'll bet you're fascinated by it.
I'm sure the audience is just riveted.
Riveted.
So plots and scripts and working with other creatives. Ron, you have drawn a whole bunch of Larry plots.
Yep. Yes.
You have also drawn scripts and plots by writers like John Byrne and Chris Claremont, Keith Giffen.
Mm-hmm.
What is particular about, and not just G.I. Joe, because Nth Man too, what is particular about a Larry plot? And can you tell us about drawing from scripts or drawing from plots?
Scripts have everything in it. Like, it's besides the panel description, and the writer's probably broken it down into like panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. But there's also, panel 1, establishing shot, Gotham City, whatever. And then it also will include the copy that's going to be in that panel, right? So, here's a caption up here. There's a couple word balloons, so you can design with that stuff, right? And a plot is basically like, here's a paragraph and that's the page, kind of, especially like Larry's thing. It's like, here's this paragraph, and he'll say, this is page 3, here's the paragraph, and then I have to figure out, like how many panels I need to tell this story. And he has a rough approximation of what the dialogue is going to be. One of the big problems I had when I first started out, I was working for him, and I did a silent issue of a yearbook. So there's no dialogue, and that ruined me for a long time, because then I failed to think about word balloons. So I was like, oh crap, I didn't leave the top third of the panel, and a shooter's gonna give me a hard time. So that's the difference between scripts and plots, right? So a script has all the copy, all of that, and they've usually broken it down into actual panels. There's 6 panels, this is what's going on in each panel, and here's the copy. Plot is basically, here's this paragraph, that's the page.
Well, I usually did a paragraph per panel.
There you go.
Short paragraph.
Yeah, short paragraph. So it's yeah. So
Well, I wanted to control the page break.
Right.
Because I hated widows, which is like when you have a scene and it's like one panel flowing over onto the next page.
Particularly a page turn.
Yeah, it's a page turn.
Because a
It's
page
like-
turn is a natural scene
Right.
break.
Yeah, so I like to have the scene end at the end of the page.
Right.
And also, I deliberately tried to have a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of every page to make the reader want to turn that page.
Exactly.
And subconsciously not know why they wanted to do that. And they get to the end of the book, they go, wow, that was a page turn. But, this is what you have to keep in mind. The problem with scripts that are written by people who can't draw is that sometimes you get these impossible things.
Yes. Yes.
I had to draw a Spider-Man thing once where the writer it was the first thing she'd ever done. This is a Fumetti book that was supposed to be online.
Fumetti is photos.
Yeah.
With word balloons, photos of real people.
And there was one panel where she said, okay, J. Jonah Jameson is in his office on the 35th floor of the Daily Bugle building, and he's looking out the window, and down on the sidewalk, Peter Parker is walking by this garbage can, and he sees that there's a Daily Bugle in the garbage can with this photo of himself on it. And I called the editor and I said, this is kind of impossible to draw. He said, well, what are you talking about? It's all written out for you right there. Because a lot of people who think in words can't really visualize it, in their heads.
Can't break it down into
Right.
beats or panels.
Yeah.
Ron,
And that's what I like about his scripts.
Okay.
Like, he thinks visually it's all, so it's easy for me to see all that stuff. And there aren't pages after pages of talking heads.
No. Well, I don't write in words. I picture the whole story as a series of images in my head, like a silent movie. And then when I sit down at the word processor, I'm just describing the silent movie I see in my head.
Right. And Keith Giffen actually he drew everything. Like that would be the script you would get.
He gave you the
yeah,
full breakdown.
Here's my drawings.
Okay, because he was also drawing comics and well known for laying out a bunch of comics.
Yeah, and
for DC.
here's my script, and it was all like laid out, which I would try to jazz up.
You mentioned talking heads.
Yeah.
You have drawn some comics with a bunch of talking heads. What do you do?
You try to make talking heads interesting.
How? Because there's a superhero project you drew, a superhero project, right? With a lot of talking heads.
Yeah, it was like some big crossover thing, and all of these characters did all of these cool, interesting things in their books, and then they got together in this book and all stood around and talked about it. So,
I reread this last year, and I'd kind of forgotten it, and I remember thinking back to when it first came out that it was a Ron project. It's like, I'm going to keep that with all my comics. I didn't keep this. Well,
I didn't either.
I found the issues for a good price, and I thought, I'm going to reread that, because I think I'm seeing Ron at AR 23. And I got through it, and I thought, oh man, this is a lot of standing around.
A lot of standing around talking.
Like,
So, yeah.
Okay.
And
There's
I hate
not much
that.
you can do with that. You
No.
can play with lighting, you can play with
Angles.
gestures and
Yeah.
expressions and
Yeah. Try to change up your shots,
Okay, so do you feel, Ron, do you feel limited when you are working from a full script?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But is some of the pressure off? Some of the decisions?
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
made
Well,
for you?
again, and again, like I know exactly how much dialogue is going to be in each panel, and
Okay.
that's the one thing I like about it, because then I can plan around that. Like I know. The thing is with him, he doesn't write that much dialogue, so it's easy to,
Right.
I mean, he's pretty, he's economical about it.
I like the story to be told with the pictures.
Yes,
And
yes.
So I add as little dialogue as I can and almost no captions. If I have a caption in the story, it's "Meanwhile in Springfield."
Right.
'Cause I remember I think my second Iron Fist job, I spent all day drawing this panoramic scene of the Himalayas with, clouds and beams of sunlight, coming through the clouds
Sounds
and
pretty.
like birds flying through the valley. And the writer felt compelled to put 9 captions on that page, all of which were describing the stuff that he was covering up with the caption. And then I realized he was making twice as much as I was for the script. And what's furthermore is he didn't even write out a script. He would call me on the phone and rattle off 2 paragraphs on the phone. He would say like, oh, in this issue, Iron Fist goes into the Meacham building, and between the ground floor and the top floor, he runs into all these traps and booby traps and hazards, and at the top floor, he meets this character called Triple Iron. He got paid full script rate for that, at twice my rate of $23 a page. And that's when I said, wait a minute. I got to get myself into this writing rack. And I spent the next 10 years or more trying to get writing work, and nobody would give me writing work.
Because you were known as an artist, as a penciler.
Yeah, and all the editors were writers, and they did not want artists to start writing their own shit because that was like spitting in their own wallet. Okay? So the only way I got to write anything was when Hasbro came to Marvel and wanted to do G.I. Joe. But at the time, licensed comics, like toy books, the licensing fee came off the top of the page rate. So you got less money to do a toy book than any of the other books. So no A-list artist or writer would work on a toy book. That's why they were all kind of crappy.
So Godzilla and,
Yeah,
and
because
Star
why
Wars
would
and
you
Battlestar
take a pay
Galactica.
cut, And this was before royalties. But I wanted to get my foot in the door writing. So Jim Shooter went to every writer at Marvel, contract writer, and they all turned it down. He went to every non-contract writer, and they all turned it down. Then he went from editorial office to editorial office, and they were all in a row. He went down the whole row. All the editors and assistant editors, even the kid that went out to get coffee, turned it down. And I was the last office in the row. And I said, sure. But, if they had offered me Barbie, I would have taken Barbie. And I would have done a damn good Barbie comic. And everybody told me, that's crazy. Don't do a toy book. I mean, you'll be a pariah for the rest of your life if you do a toy book, because that's considered the bottom of the barrel, And they were right. I was never offered an A-list book at Marvel while it was an A-list book, The only reason I got Wolverine was they were about to cancel it. And they figured, well, Hama can't mess it up any more than it is. So within a year, it was the number 2 selling book in the country. And I went back and I said, oh, doesn't that prove anything? And they said, oh no, like both G.I. Joe and Wolverine are flukes. That doesn't mean anything. So, but we got this other book that we're almost going to cancel. You know, you want that? I said, what is it? They said, the Avengers. And believe it or not, at that time, very few people wanted to work on group books, you know, artists and writers, because you had all these characters. You had to, you know, they were all complaining, oh, there's too many, you know, costumes to remember, you know, and
At least they didn't all have guns.
yeah, yeah.
Complicated, difficult to draw, realistic guns.
Yeah, and you know, the other book that people complained about drawing was Spider-Man, of all things, because nobody could remember which way the webbing, drawing the webbing on the costume.
Yeah, I know.
It was really hard because you had to draw the body absolutely perfectly, or else once you put the webbing on it, it looked crappy.
You look crappy.
Right?
Yeah.
And, you know, if people don't draw, they don't realize that.
Right.
You know, but you know, that's why one of the favorite books that everybody wanted to work on was Moon Knight. Oh, this is an easy job.
Yeah.
Okay, so G.I. Joe had and has a lot of realistic, accurate weaponry and gear. You went to the Joe Kubert school, Ron. Kubert was famous for Sergeant Rock.
Yes.
Decades of Sergeant Rock, and
very inaccurate weaponry.
Oh yeah. Joe never let any of that stand in the way.
No.
I always loved his bullets. They're just like little, you know, so.
Oh, and he made up this German grenade that everybody else copied.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It was like, what the heck is that? It had straps on it.
They had straps on it. Yeah, I know.
And a big swastika.
Exactly.
Looked nothing like an actual potato masher.
No.
okay, Ron, you have said that you wanted to get into comics to draw war comics.
Yeah, weirdly enough, I did.
To draw Sergeant Rock.
Yeah.
And you went to the Kubert school, and third year, your instructor is Joe Kubert.
Uh-huh.
So then you get to draw G.I. Joe after a couple other things.
Yeah.
So was G.I. Joe a war book, or was it a war book enough for you?
It had to be.
Okay.
You know, like that was it. You know, so the other kind of war thing, I did a story for him for Savage. Was it Savage Tales? Is that the book?
This was a black and white magazine that Larry edited, lasted less than a year.
Yeah.
It was about 2 years almost. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this was a story, the rare story that you penciled and
inked, yeah, and I think I did it in Do a Shade and all that kind of stuff. I got all fancy with it, and I remember I took in, I did these little roughs for each page, and they were just immaculately detailed and rendered, and just I spent so much time on them, and I took them in and I showed them to him, and he looks at it and he says, am I supposed to pay you for these? Yeah. Said, you wasted a bunch of time on these little things. So, but it was an actual kind of war story. So, and in my mind, G.I. Joe was never kind of that. It's just not somehow.
It's action.
It's action. Yeah, there's tons of action
and
and
combat. It's not. The
yeah,
war.
yeah. It's not like these guys could this whole platoon could die. That kind of stuff. You know. So.
Well, you know, when I was editing, you know, my concern was getting the stuff in on time. You know, so
yeah.
I mean, Rod Wiggum was really slow, and he was so slow that, you know, I had Marvel fly him up to New York from Atlanta, and I said, "Okay, Ron, sit down at the drawing table and show me how you do a page." He said, "Well, first of all, I do these little thumbnails, you know, like this size. Then I blow them up to like, you know, comic size." You know, and then I tighten that up, and then I make these layouts on tracing paper, and then I put the tracing paper on a light box, and I tighten up over. So I said, okay, wait a second. I picked up the little thumbnail, and I said, Rod, Rod, do I pay you
He
for
did
this
this
piece
to
of
me,
paper?
too. Yeah.
I said, no. I picked up the next piece of paper. I said, do I pay you for this piece of paper? He said, no. I picked up the layout. I said, do I pay you for this piece of paper? He said, no. I picked up the actual artboard, and I said, this is the only piece of paper I pay you for, and it would behoove you to only work on this piece of paper.
And I went in for the year, and I spent a couple of days with him, and he kind of did the same thing to me.
Yeah.
You know,
And then
yeah.
you know, to cement it, I went next door to Ralph Macchio's office, and I said, Ralph, you know, you're always behind. Have you got a book that's really late that you need to be done like in like 2 weeks? He said, yeah, man, you know, everybody's messing up on the Moon Knight deadlines. I said, oh, give me a script. So I take this Moon Knight script, I go back to my office, I sit down at the drawing table, I said, Rod, watch this. And I took the boards and I laid out 3 pages. You know, full-size layouts on the 3 pages. I did it about 15 minutes, you know. Then I handed him like 18 sheets of paper and a pencil, and I said, okay, you got till tomorrow morning to lay out, you know, to draw this whole book. And he was like, oh, I can't do that. And I said, yes, you can, you know. And he did. And the book was printed.
Right. Rod Wiggum tells this story in the Talking Joe Rod Wiggum interview episode, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. He was a good sport. All right, so Larry, you read war comics when you were younger, right? Were some of those comics the ones that got you interested in drawing and making comics?
Well, I liked them, but I wasn't. I got into comics because I wanted to do ducks. I was a Carl Barks fan. I wanted to do funny animals, but nobody was buying funny animals. I mean, so Bucky O'Hare was the closest I got to that. Bucky was was an example of what I really wanted to do.
Right.
So sort of one part Uncle Scrooge and the Nephews, one part space action, one part something else.
It was a combination of my love for Carl Barks and my love for Wally Wood.
Okay.
So I wanted to do those, science fiction stuff mixed with, the ducks.
All right. So Wally Wood had done all these famous science fiction stories at EC in the 50s. Weird science, weird fantasy, weird science fantasy. So you have this urge to do sci-fi. All right. So if G.I. Joe is not a war book, but it's an action book, but it has these fantastical elements like a cloned man and astronauts who fight in space.
But no lasers. I refuse to do that.
Can you or how do you sort of get your sci-fi jollies out of G.I. Joe, or does it not allow for that?
Oh yeah, because a lot of the vehicles are pretty fantastical. And then you got the space shuttle and some of the aircraft and all that, and then you got the things like the brainwave scanner and clones and self-aware androids and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of that there.
So do you think of G.I. Joe as realistic? Do you think of it as grounded? It's not our sort of right outside the window.
No, it's like the visuals are fantastical, but I tried to keep the characterizations and the dramaturgy grounded. People have real emotions, and they interact with each other in what I felt was a much more realistic way than the X-Men. And I used to get I got 20 to 30% of my mail on the original G.I. Joe run was girls. And they all said the same thing, that, I have like 4 brothers or 5 brothers. So I get all their hand-me-downs. And the thing is that, if something to read comes into a household where there's 5 kids, every kid in the household reads it. So they said, well, I read my brother's G.I. Joe comics, and I like them better than the mutant stuff, because in the mutant comics, all the girls are just sort of standing around taking showers and, have their palms nailed to their foreheads, and in G.I. Joe, they actually do stuff, and they're treated in the team just the same, and they really like that. So it's, when I realized that, I started, doing some more emphasis on the female characters. In the IDW run about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe less than that, I decided, well, I'm going to do an entire issue with not a single guy in it. Even the background characters, all going to be women. And wrote it, had it drawn, went out to press, not a single letter. Nobody seemed to notice it. I was really amazed. And, it was...
in a good way.
Yeah, and I was very happy about that.
Okay, so Ron, you drew G.I. Joe in the 80s, and you came back to draw an issue or two for IDW.
Yes.
What had changed? How were you different as an artist? How was the job, the gig different?
Well, my page rate was lower, so there was that.
Okay.
That had changed.
Okay.
And I just think my style has gotten simpler. I spent a couple years doing storyboards with a guy that does storyboards for Warner Brothers, and we worked on all sorts of stuff.
For animation?
For animation, yes, for cartoon animation.
Storyboarding for animation
Yes.
taught you to...
simplify
Okay.
and be, and just because that, when you storyboard for cartoon animation, stuff has to be on model, but you
Right.
can't be too precious about it,
Right.
because you got a whole bunch of it to do, so in a very short amount of time. So
All right, so you have drawn G.I. Joe for Marvel and for IDW, and those trading cards for the Skybound
Yeah.
Kickstarter.
Mhm.
So for three publishers.
Uh-huh.
Do you think about drawing G.I. Joe for Skybound if there were an opportunity?
yeah, maybe, sure. If he writes it, yeah. So,
You got to finish the other project.
I got another thing. Yeah, I got another thing to do, Tim. I got to finish that. So, yeah. I've already turned them down because I got to finish the thing. So, yeah.
That's a
It's
good.
like 8 years in the making.
8 years in the making.
Or
yeah.
more.
Yeah.
That's a good segue to just about wrap up. So I hear you can't talk about it.
Apparently, no.
Ron Wagner, you are drawing something. Larry Hama, you are writing something.
The same thing.
The same thing. Yeah.
It's not G.I. Joe.
It's not G.I. Joe.
And this is not a question because you can't talk about it.
No.
But maybe next year, an announcement?
Well, certainly next year, because this won't go on anymore. So, I will not have another discussion with you about this not being done. So.
Larry, just so we can put a pin in sort of where G.I. Joe is, we're in the gap between issue 310 and 311. 311 is at your table, amazingly, here at Assembly Required. What issue are you working on now?
315.
Cool. Is there anything else? You have a creator-owned project that had a successful crowdfunding campaign recently.
Yeah.
Would you like to hype that project to these nice folks?
I'm writing and laying it out. It's called Mounties versus Werewolves. And it's a period piece that takes place right after World War I in northern Alberta. And it's a veteran of the Great War comes back to Canada and resumes his previous job as a Mountie, and he gets assigned to this remote outpost in the woods. And when he gets there, he finds that there's a secret project going on there that to contain these werewolves in northern Alberta and keep them from spreading down into the populated areas. And that's the kickoff of it.
You have written and you're laying out the pages?
Right.
Okay. And
First issue will be 48 pages.
first issue will be 48 pages. People can find it via your Facebook page.
Right.
If you have, so we're going to wrap up without questions because we're going all the way until the end of the block. But I know some of you have questions. But good news, Ron and Larry will be at their tables for the rest of the show, drawing for you, signing for you, posing for photos with you, and answering your questions. Everyone, thank you so much. Ron and Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to the grind.
That was great. Thanks again to Brian Sauer and also Travis, who are the convention organizers. It is a wonderful convention, assembly required. Find out more about Talking Joe at talkingjoe.co.uk, our website with links to all of the places where we are. You can join our Facebook group and add to our discussion there. We're on Twitter and Instagram. If you're listening on a podcast platform, why not leave us a review and a 5-star rating? If you're watching us on YouTube, hit like and hit subscribe. We're also on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. So a big thanks to all of our backers, Richard, Sam, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, Frank, and Mike, who get early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. Stay tuned for cool interviews. We'll be wrapping up our Devil's Due coverage of the America's Elite series and the World War III storyline, and we're heading back to A Real American Hero as that series returns after a month off, with Chris Mooneyham returning as artist. And we'll continue to cover the Energon universe now that the main monthly G.I. Joe series there has at last started. Find me at youtube.com/@AtomicAbe. Find me at Hub Comics, that's a store, and my website, arealamericanbook.com. That's us, or just me, done for this week. But remember that nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast. Laters.